Hercules Poirot and the Painting That Was Never Painted. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Commission. On a misty November morning, as the city of London woke up to a fine persistent drizzle, Hercule Poirot was enjoying his hot chocolate in his apartment at Whitehaven Mansions. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, and the Persian rug he cared for so much was perfectly aligned with the legs of the couch. Everything was, as it should be, in order. "Ah, perfection," murmured Poirot, looking with pleasure at his newly polished shoes. What greater comfort can there be than a symmetrical environment? It was at that moment, just as he was lifting the cup, that the letter arrived. The building's butler, George, knocked gently on the door and handed her the envelope with a respectful bow. "On behalf of Lady Weatherby, sir." Personally sealed. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Lady Helena Weatherby, widow of a prominent art collector, patron of eccentric painters, and regular hostess of dinners where art and scandal mixed like vermouth and gin. The handwriting was firm, elegant. Opening the envelope, Poirot read, "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I ask you to consider this invitation with the urgency it deserves. A delicate matter forces me to request your services, not as a detective, which is undoubtedly the best, but as a man of discretion and psychological finesse. Tonight I will be hosting a small dinner at my residence in Belgravia. Only those involved will be present under the pretext of an intimate celebration. I will not say more in writing, except that the matter revolves around a painting that was never painted, but whose existence has caused a tragedy. I trust that you will understand the subtlety of the matter. With respect and admiration, Helena Weatherby Poirot leaned back slightly in his chair, fingers clasped under his chin, eyes shining with interest. A painting that was never painted. But then, how can something that doesn't exist cause a tragedy? And why require the presence of Hercule Poirot to observe not a completed crime, but a social enigma disguised as a soirée? At exactly 8 o'clock at night, Poirot got out of his taxi in front of a stately Georgian residence, impeccably maintained. The butler received him with deference and led him to the main hall, where the hostess waited among silver candelabras and impressionist paintings of dubious origin. Lady Weatherby, still imposing in her mid-60s, with her white hair tied back and a forest green velvet dress, greeted him with a mixture of urgency and courtesy. "Monsieur Poirot, thanks for coming. Tonight you will see friendly faces, friendly smiles, and an atmosphere of celebration. Don't be fooled. What is not said will be more important than what is expressed." Poirot nodded gravely, glancing around the room. 7 other people were present: a young artist with a vacant look, a conceited art critic, a Parisian dealer with a carefully exaggerated accent, a smiling society lady, a silent lawyer, a restless young heir, and a retired colonel who smelled of expensive whiskey. Everyone was chatting, laughing, and watching. Lady Weatherby led him to the dining room, where dinner was served. The conversation was lively, peppered with cultural anecdotes and aesthetic judgments, but beneath the words, Poirot felt the tensions. "It is said," the art critic commented, cutting his meat efficiently, "that young Edmund Ashcroft had begun his masterpiece. A portrait that would change his career. And then he destroyed it. Or maybe he never painted it. Who knows? Oh, but that's part of his tormented genius. the artist replied without looking at him. True art doesn't always need a canvas. Fascinating, murmured Poirot. And was it this invisible work that caused such a stir? More than that, Lady Weatherby interjected, her voice suddenly firm. It caused a death. An awkward silence fell over the table. Only the faint clinking of a glass could be heard. Poirot laid his napkin on the table slowly. Alors, I think it's time for us to talk about the painting that was never painted. Chapter 2. 7 faces, none are the same. Once dinner was over, Lady Weatherby offered brandy and coffee in the drawing-room, where the atmosphere became more intimate. The lights dimmed slightly, and the shadows of the hanging portraits seemed to lengthen as if they too wanted to listen. Poirot, seated in an armchair near the fire, carefully observed the faces of those present while they conversed with false naturalness. His memory, sharp as a razor, recorded every gesture, every inflection of voice, every slight twitch of his eyebrows. Lady Weatherby raised her glass with a ceremonious gesture. I want to toast the talent, the mystery, and the art that still makes us doubt what is real and what is not. The young heir, Julian Weatherby, raised his glass, but his smile seemed strained on the inside. He was a man in his 20s, with an attractive but restless face, as if his whole body wanted to run out of the room. And for Edmund Ashcroft, he said, and there was a pause, absent but present. As usual, Poirot turned his head towards him. Monsieur Ashcroft is not with us tonight. The artist, a young woman with short hair and a melancholic look, responded before anyone could intervene. Edmund is dead, Monsieur Poirot. 4 nights ago, a slight shock ran through the group, although it was clear that the news was not new to any of them. Fall from the balcony of his study, added the retired colonel, finishing his whisky. It was said that it was an accident, but nobody believes that, of course. And why not? Asked Poirot in a soft voice. The lawyer, a lean, methodical man named Mr. Elridge, spoke for the first time. Because Edmund was meticulous about his security, and that balcony had a wrought iron railing. One does not fall just like that. Besides, the French dealer, Monsieur Duvivier, intervened. There were rumours that Edmund was going to paint something compromising. A portrait that could ruin an important reputation. Very dangerous, isn't it? Poirot bowed slightly. And yet, the painting does not exist, isn't it? The artist, who until now had not revealed her name, responded with a soft but firm voice. I'm Iris Lemaire. It was his model, and I can tell you that the portrait began. But he stopped him, or pretended to stop him. I never saw the canvas. I used to cover him with a sheet when I wasn't working. He said it wasn't time yet, and the night of his death, asked Poirot, without moving an inch. Where were you, mademoiselle? An icy silence fell on the room. Lady Weatherby frowned. Monsieur Poirot, is this already an interrogation? Poirot smiled kindly. Oh, no, madam. Just the conversation of a curious man. But you will understand that a man like Edmund Ashcroft does not die in silence. His talent, his ties, his unfinished work. Everything speaks of something else. Something that hasn't been said yet. Lady Weatherby pursed her lips. The portrait that was not painted was for me. A private order. It never came to fruition. but apparently others thought so, and that painting hid a secret. Poirot nodded very slowly. His gaze once again travelled over the gathered faces, as if he were placing each one on an invisible board. Interesting. A painting that no one has seen. An artist who dies before revealing it. And a circle of acquaintances who seem to know too much, and at the same time nothing. The Colonel growled. "And what do you expect to find, Poirot? A hidden signature? An invisible line?" "Non, mon colonel," replied Poirot sweetly. "I just need to observe, because what is hidden in this room is not a work of art. It is an unspeakable truth." As the guests began to say goodbye, Poirot approached the butler. "A trivial question, monsieur. Do you remember who was the last to see Mr. Ashcroft alive?" The stone-faced butler hesitated for a second. "I think it was Miss Lemaire. She left her study around 9. He said he wanted to work privately." Poirot nodded slowly. His gaze slid to Iris, who was just at that moment crossing the entrance with a light step. "Merci, that's enough. But for tonight." And while the wind beat on the drawing-room windows, Poirot was left alone for a moment, looking at the fireplace. A painting that no one saw, a dead artist, and 7 witnesses, each one with something they don't say. Chapter 3. The Traces of the Painter Who Erased Himself. The next morning, the sky over London was a dense, almost liquid grey, as if the entire city were suspended in smoke. Hercule Poirot, with his coat perfectly buttoned and his cane carefully tilted under his arm, was walking towards Edmund Ashcroft's studio, located on a quiet street in the Chelsea neighbourhood, where the buildings stood as mute witnesses to art and its storms. Lady Weatherby, after the evening, had offered the key to the study to Poirot, so that he could clarify discreetly any detail that might disturb Edmund's memory. Poirot, of course, was not a man to leave details in the dark. The studio was located on the 2nd floor of a red brick house. A modest plaque by the door announced E. Ashcroft, painter. The entrance smelled of turpentine and aged paper. Crossing the threshold, Poirot stopped. The place was spacious, with large windows facing north, as befitted any serious artist. There were easels, half-finished sketches, paintbrushes grouped together like soldiers, an old radio, and a fallen chair near the balcony. Everything seemed frozen in a suspended moment, as if Edmund had gone out to buy paint and simply never returned. Poirot walked slowly. His cane touched the ground without haste. His gaze swept every corner. "Too clean," he muttered to himself. "Too edited." He stopped in front of the main trestle. Above him, a blank canvas. Not one worked on, covered in paint and then scraped off. No, absolutely white, new, but the sheet covering it was wrinkled with a slight reddish stain near the bottom edge. Poirot touched it with his handkerchief, leaving no traces. Painting, perhaps, or something else. Next to the easel, a small table contained the usual: tubes of oil paint, mixing blades, dry palettes. But Poirot noticed something that did not harmonize with the meticulousness of the rest of the study. A sketchpad was open to a torn page. The torn blade had been violently removed. A blur of inspiration, or something that shouldn't be seen, whispered Poirot. On the floor, a small card fell from the pad as I moved it. It was a folded invitation. A cocktail at Helena Weatherby's house, October 12th. Bring what can't be hung in a gallery. Poirot narrowed his eyes. That night one of Lady Weatherby's famous private meetings had taken place. The artist Iris Lemaire had mentioned it, almost inadvertently, when describing when Edmund began to close himself in more. The detective then approached the balcony. The iron railings were firm, with no signs of damage, but on the lower frame of the window, just where one would place a hand to open it, Poirot noticed something tiny. A small scratch, like a ring or a fingernail. And right next to it, between the wood and the wall, a strand of fabric, dark, of velvet perhaps. Poirot took it carefully with tweezers. The murderer, if there was one, left no blood, but it left an urgency. And that urgency leaves traces. Always. As he turned, his gaze fell on a shelf with framed portraits. There was an old photograph of Edmund in his academy years, another with Iris, and a final one in black and white, where he toasted someone whose face had been violently scratched. The frame was intact. Only the passenger's face had been erased. Poirot frowned. That gesture was not artistic. It was personal. Then a creak on the stairs alerted him. He hadn't announced his presence to anyone, but someone else had arrived. The door slowly opened a crack, revealing Julian Weatherby. "Oh, I didn't know you'd be here so early," he said, visibly uncomfortable. Poirot, without losing his courteous tone, greeted him with a slight nod. "Monsieur Weatherby, do you usually visit a dead man's study?" "Not quite. I came to pick up some letters. Edmund owed me some documents. It is a legal issue. My mother asked me." "Interesting," replied Poirot. "And did you know that the canvas on the main easel is completely blank?" Julian hesitated. "White? I assumed he had removed it, or that it hadn't started yet. I didn't get too involved in their processes." Poirot approached him, measuring his breathing, his blinking. "And did you ever see that painting?" "No, nobody saw it, but it was said, it was said that it was not just another work, that it was a portrait that could ruin lives." "Including yours?" Julian turned pale. "What does it mean?" Poirot smiled kindly. "Nothing, monsieur. It's just that some paintings, even those that are never painted, can cast very real shadows." Julian excused himself shortly after, leaving the study hastily. Poirot watched the young man's cane, with its metal handle, hit the bottom step with a clang. Alone in the room, Poirot looked again at the white canvas. But not with the eyes of a spectator. With the eyes of reasoning. White. As if everything was going to begin, or as if everything had been erased. Chapter 4. The Broken Mirror of Memory. That same afternoon, Poirot returned to Whitehaven Mansions, where he found his faithful Georges waiting for him with a tray of tea and a barely contained curious expression. "Any interesting news, sir?" Poirot sat down with mathematical elegance, aligning the edge of the saucer with the edge of the armrest. "Too many new things, Georges, and yet all empty, like a frame without paint." "Are you referring to Mr. Ashcroft's painting, sir?" "No, George. I mean his acquaintances. 7 people, each with a past linked to the artist, but all present carefully edited versions, as if each one had something to erase from the final portrait." Georges did not ask more. He knew that when his master started talking like that, it was better to listen and make a second tea. Poirot rose. He walked to his desk, where he unfolded a blank sheet of paper and drew a diagram. In the centre, Edmund Ashcroft. Around it 7 names joined by arrows, underlined with brief notes. Iris Lemaire, model, last to see him alive. Julian Weatherby, heir, elusive. Duvivier, dealer, new rumours. Colonel Bainbridge, protective, silent. Elridge, lawyer, prudent. Lady Weatherby, patron and mother. Amanda Lytton, society lady, no history yet clear. Poirot underlined Amanda's name firmly. You haven't said anything yet that couldn't be found in a social column. Why so much elegant silence? The next day, Poirot made a date with Amanda Lytton. He found her in the greenhouse of his home in Kensington, surrounded by perfectly cultivated orchids and a dachshund with an unpronounceable name. Monsieur Poirot, he said with a smile that seemed sculpted rather than born. I didn't expect him to be interested in me. I'm just a friend of Lady Weatherby. Ah, but for that very reason, mademoiselle, said Poirot, taking a seat among the flowers. You were part of his inner circle, and I'm sure you knew Monsieur Ashcroft well. Amanda waved her hand, as if to shake off an uncomfortable thought. Edmund was charming, bright, but also chaotic. You never knew if you were being admired or analysed. Analysed? Oh, sure. Sometimes he looked at me as if I had already broken down into shapes and lines, as if I saw more than I knew myself. It made many women uncomfortable. And you? Amanda looked at him, the smile barely lingering. I got used to it. Poirot bowed his head. Did you know that he was working on a portrait that, according to some, contained a dangerous secret? Amanda looked down at a flower she held between her fingers. We all knew it in a way. He spoke of the true portrait. He said it wouldn't be decorative, that it would show someone how he really was. Whom? Amanda hesitated. Then he gently shook his head. He never said it. I was just implying. We thought it was part of his method, his drama as an artist. But the truth is that, in his last weeks, Edmund was different. Different. How? He became reserved, irritable. He had a very strong argument with Julian at Lady Weatherby's house. Nobody knows why. And one night he came here, late, very upset. He asked me something strange. What did you ask him? If I believed that the truth could destroy a person more than a lie. I told him yes, that there are truths that one prefers not to know. He left without saying anything else. Poirot observed the imperceptible tremor in the hand that held the flower. And what do you think, mademoiselle? Did you paint that portrait? Amanda looked up slowly. Don't know, but if he did, someone made. Sure, there was no trace left. Back in his apartment, Poirot took the thread of velvet found in the study from the inside pocket of his coat. It was a dark green tone, very similar to the dress Amanda had worn the night of the dinner. But it wasn't enough. Poirot sat down at the board and looked at his diagram again. As she looked at him, her eyes fell on a word written under Julian. Legal documents. He stood up abruptly. He picked up the phone and dialed Elridge's office. Yeah, this is Hercule Poirot. I need to know if Edmund Ashcroft's will was recently updated, and who is listed as the beneficiary. Elridge responded after a brief pause. Monsieur Poirot, that is confidential information, unless there is a formal investigation. Poirot smiled, but his voice was as firm as the fold of his handkerchief. Consider it a moral investigation, monsieur. Believe me, there is more than one person in danger. That night, Poirot closed his bedroom window and turned to face his reflection in the mirror. The fabric is blank, but the invisible lines are there. Everyone thinks they destroyed the painting. His eyes sparkled, but no one suspects that the portrait still exists. Chapter 5. The Hand That Doesn't Know How to Paint, but Erases. The next morning, London woke up to a faint golden glow that softened the corners of buildings and the faces of passers-by. For Hercule Poirot, however, that dim sun did not bring light, but rather a more defined shadow. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to be outlined, although not yet fitting together. There was a visit that could not be postponed. Elridge received him in his office with the same polished and neutral attitude as always. A man without adornments, without rush, with a voice trained to say a lot, without saying anything. Mr. Poirot, he said with a measured bow, I hope you haven't misunderstood my reticence yesterday. It was not about hindering their work, but about respecting the formalities. But after a conversation with Lady Weatherby, I am authorized to share some information. Poirot nodded with a slight smile. All right, monsieur. Edmund Ashcroft's will. Was it recently updated? Yeah, a month before his death, to be exact, although the content was surprising. He left most of his assets to an artistic foundation that has not yet been formally established. Poirot frowned. And who was listed as the executor of the will? Julian Weatherby. Somewhat unusually, considering. They weren't particularly close. But Ashcroft chose him, apparently, because he was outside the art world. His words, not mine. And what about the material content of your study? Works, sketches, belongings. That remained under the guardianship of the Weatherby family until the foundation is formalized, which legally allows Julian to temporarily have the content. Poirot bowed his head. The drawing became clearer. And do you know if there was a list of pending or missing works? Elridge hesitated. Just a vague document where Ashcroft mentions a definitive work, not exhibitable but necessary. He doesn't name her, it doesn't describe it, which has given rise, as you can imagine, to much speculation. Poirot took his leave minutes later without further questions. He knew that, with men like Elridge, what was valuable was not what they said, but what they chose not to write down. Hours later, Poirot was welcomed back into the Weatherby house. This time not by Lady Helena, but by Julian, visibly irritated. Again, Monsieur Poirot. This is turning into an invasion. My mother is not available. Then you will be the one to help me, monsieur, replied Poirot calmly. I need to see what you removed from Ashcroft's study. Sketches, papers, whatever you found valuable. I already told you there was nothing important. Some minor drawings. The rest was incomplete or destroyed. Destroyed by who? For himself, I suppose. Wasn't he an artist? They do it all the time. They tear, burn, abandon ideas. Poirot walked slowly around the room, without looking directly at Julian, curious, because someone scratched a face off a photograph, with fury, and he also tore a page from his sketchbook. You said it was for legal documents, but I didn't see any in the studio. Julian didn't respond. Poirot stopped by a small secretary by the window. "Can I show you something, monsieur?" Without waiting for a response, he took the velvet thread out of his pocket. "This was found in the balcony frame. It apparently matches the jacket you were wearing on the night of the incident." Julian tensed. "What are you implying?" "Nothing for now. Only you went up to that balcony. Or maybe they pushed you, and you tried to stop them. Or he was a witness, and he hasn't said it. I went to the studio that night," he suddenly admitted. "But Edmund was alive when I left. We had an argument. He wanted to make something public, something that would affect everyone. He said he could no longer remain silent. And what was it? He didn't say it. He only repeated that the portrait would speak for itself. He was crazy." Poirot approached slowly with calm eyes. "And you destroyed the portrait?" Julian looked at him, unblinking. "There was no portrait, I swear. Or, at least, not on the easel." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Finally, a loophole. Then where?" Julian hesitated, and just then a soft voice interrupted from the stairs. "Not on the easel, but on the back of another canvas. He hid it as if it were his confession." Lady Weatherby was descending, an envelope in her hand. His face looked tired, but determined. "After he died, I found this among his things. A note. It is not a will. It's more of a warning. Says, do not look for the portrait. It is closer to you than you imagine. And if you see it, it will be too late." Poirot took the envelope with precise hands. "He hasn't opened it yet." He held it as if it weighed more than its size. "A warning. Interesting. It means that the portrait exists, but not as a work to show. Not for the market, nor for glory, but as a truth, destined to hurt." Lady Weatherby looked at him with dark eyes. "And you, Monsieur Poirot, do you think anyone saw you?" Poirot did not respond immediately. He looked at Julian, to Lady Helena, in the shadows of the house. Someone not only saw it, someone was so afraid of what it showed that they tried to erase it. That night, Poirot returned home with the envelope still sealed. He placed it on his desk, looked at it for a long time, and did not open it. Not yet. Not before I'm sure. Because the painting, although invisible, was still there, and the little grey cells still had work to do. Chapter 6. The Confession That Was Not Written. At dawn, Poirot was on his feet. He had slept little. The envelope left by Lady Weatherby still lay intact on his desk, like a letter without a return address, sent from the threshold of remorse. Georges watched him out of the corner of his eye while he served breakfast. "Would you like me to open it, sir?" "No, Georges, not yet. Written words are like bullets. Once fired, they cannot be returned to the weapon. You have to know when to read, and when to observe the silence that surrounds you. And the portrait, do you think it really exists?" Poirot took a bite of his brioche slowly. "It is not a question of existence, Georges. The painting has already had an effect. It has disturbed It has provoked fear. It has motivated actions. What interests me is not its form, but who it portrayed. And why was that truth so unbearable? Around noon, Poirot returned to Edmund Ashcroft's study. This time, he wasn't looking for new clues. I wanted to look at the same thing, with different eyes. He looked through the canvases stored on the racks along the wall, one after another, half-finished landscapes, faceless portraits, nameless abstractions. They all had a particular quality. They were works in progress, not finished, but one, in the background, caught his attention. It was larger than the rest, and unlike the others, it was placed upside down, with its back exposed. The back fabric showed signs of having been reused, small stains, patches, remains of old nails. Poirot lifted him carefully, not because of the front, but because of the structure. On the inside of the frame, barely visible, was an inscription written in pencil. What is not painted is hidden. What is hidden rots. Poirot murmured, "An artist does not hide the incomplete. Hide what you are afraid to show." He replaced the canvas. That frame was not the portrait, but maybe he had held it, or had covered it. The truth was that Edmund had hidden something, not from the world, but from those closest to him. And in the centre of that circle, Poirot began to see a face that did not fit his public role. Hours later, Poirot looked for Iris Lemaire in the café, where he used to exhibit his minor works. She received him with a mixture of surprise and resignation. "Are you still looking for the murderer, Monsieur Poirot? Or the ghost of the painter?" "Perhaps both, mademoiselle." "But right now, he looks for the woman who knew him better than anyone. You were his model, your confidant, isn't it?" Iris sighed. His eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept. "I was many things to him, but not his salvation, if that is what he seeks. No," said Poirot, "I'm looking for what you haven't said. Edmund lived in a turbulent internal world. He painted truths that others avoided. But you knew what that portrait contained." Iris didn't respond. "Was that the portrait?" She shook her head quickly. "No, although I thought about it for weeks, but it wasn't me. I understood it late." "Then who?" Iris hesitated. "I didn't see it. He never showed it to me. But I heard something. One night while he was talking to himself. It said, 'She gave me a place. She offered me a mask. But behind, I saw her.'" Poirot repeated the words in a low voice. "He offered me a mask." "It was about Lady Weatherby," Iris finally said. "I'm sure. He used to say that she bought more than art. I bought biographies. Did you want to expose it? I don't think so. He wanted to be free of her, paint her not as the great patron, but as what he said she really was, a woman who moulded others to hide her own reflection. And that would have been enough to kill him?" Iris looked out the window, as if the answer was on the horizon. If anyone knew that painting showed what she really was. Yes, or if they were afraid that she herself would know. Poirot leaned forward. They? Many depended on Lady Weatherby. Of his money, of his protection, of his silence. A portrait that showed her as a manipulator, as a destroyer, would have dragged more than one person with her. As night fell, Poirot turned on his desk lamp. He finally placed the envelope in front of him. This time he opened it. Inside, a sheet with just one line, written in Edmund Ashcroft's exact handwriting. The portrait was painted, but not to be seen, only to be remembered. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment. I already understood it. The portrait was not in the studio. It never was, because the true picture was in the mind of those who couldn't stand it, and perhaps of the one who couldn't let others see it. Chapter 7. The Price of the Invisible Portrait. That same night, while the city vibrated gently with the murmur of rain on the windows, Hercule Poirot was in his living room, walking in a straight line between the fireplace and the sideboard, his hands crossed behind his back, his lips pursed in concentration. Georges, silently, removed the remains of dinner without daring to interrupt. "Georges," Poirot said finally, stopping short, "have you ever seen something so destructive? That without existing, it can bring down reputations, friendships, even lives. As an idea, sir, exactly. An idea. Or even more. A mental image, a portrait that is not shown, but that everyone believes they see. A mirror that everyone is afraid to look at for fear of what it reflects." Georges nodded slightly, although he said no more. He had also learned not to fill the air with unnecessary noise. When the small grey cells, they were underway. Poirot sat down in front of the desk and extended the note found in the envelope. The portrait was painted, but not to be seen, only to be remembered. A statement that was not metaphorical. It was literal. Ashcroft had painted it, yes, but its location or its current form remained an enigma. But Poirot already knew the essential thing. The next morning, he requested a second interview with Lady Weatherby. She received him in her private studio, a space decorated with works of art, selected with exquisite taste and surgical coldness. Each piece seemed chosen more to communicate status than emotion. "You have returned, Monsieur Poirot. Have you read the note?" "Yes, madam. And I'll tell you something frankly. I'm not here to seek criminal justice. If someone killed Edmund Ashcroft, they did not do it for money, nor for common revenge. He did it out of fear, and fear, madame, is the oldest and most dangerous motive." Lady Weatherby regarded him expressionlessly. "And what exactly do you think you discovered? That the painting existed? That it was a portrait not of you, but of what you represent, from the system you created, protecting certain artists, financing certain careers, burying certain errors. Edmund, in a final burst of clarity or revenge, perhaps both, decided to expose that." She took a long sip of tea. Then he spoke, very slowly. "If I had shown it, it would have destroyed me. And not just me. Julian lives off my last name. Amanda from my presentations. Elridge from my wallet. Even Iris, she lived off the myth of Edmund, not the man. Everyone had reason to fear that portrait." Poirot nodded gently. "But it was you who found the note. You who had access to your things before anyone else. You who, according to witnesses, left discreetly the morning after his death, and returned without being announced. I would deny it if it would help," she replied with disturbing calm. "But I did not kill him, Monsieur Poirot. Edmund took his own life. I just made sure he didn't leave a fire behind." Poirot looked at her for a long time. "And you destroyed the portrait?" "No, I never found it. Maybe he hid it somewhere else. Maybe at Amanda's house, or at Iris's studio, Or maybe he burned it down himself. But it doesn't matter any more, does it? Poirot rose. It will depend on what you consider important, madam. For some, the truth is the only thing that matters. For others, it is enough to protect the version you want to preserve. She followed him with her eyes to the door. And you, Monsieur Poirot? What group are you in? Poirot smiled faintly. I only seek to understand why people do what they do. The truth can wait. On the way to his apartment, Poirot passed by the gallery where Amanda Lytton used to exhibit. Closed. No signs of reopening. An improvised sign in the display case read, "Closed due to renovation." But Poirot suspected that it was not a renovation of walls, but of reputation. On the street he stopped for a moment when he saw a shop window with an unsigned portrait. A female figure, outlined in confusing lines, almost erased. The eyes were empty. The background, a vortex of shadows. Poirot contemplated the image for several seconds. It wasn't Ashcroft's work, but the feeling was the same, of something that meant more than the world was ready to hear. That night at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot lit one last candle and wrote a note to himself in his personal diary. Crime, in the end, does not always leave corpses. Sometimes it only leaves incomplete portraits, and silences that are too eloquent. He kept the sheet. Then he turned off the light, and in the silence of the room, only the idea of a painting remained floating. That was never painted, but that no one could stop seeing. Chapter 8. The Words That Were Not Said Out Loud. Days later, the air in London seemed thicker, as if the city itself was carrying a secret that had not yet been revealed. Hercule Poirot, however, had not stopped. While the world around believed the case had come to an end, a tragic suicide, a work lost, a scandal averted, he continued connecting invisible threads, examining reactions, gaps in discourse, and carefully rehearsed omissions. An unsigned letter delivered that morning finally sparked his interest. The message, brief and unadorned, only said he did show it. Not to everyone, just to one person. But that person didn't forget it. J. Poirot left the letter on his table, along with other handwritten notes. Phrases taken from testimonies, gestures noted with surgical precision. Each of those small details had its value. Across the room, Georges watched him silently, carefully cleaning a vase that didn't need cleaning. "Do you suspect Julian?" he finally dared to ask. Poirot did not respond immediately. He walked slowly to the window, contemplating the coming and going of the city. "No, Georges, I suspect everyone, and no one. Because the culprit here is not measured in blood, it is measured in intention, in fear, in which each one decided to remain silent when they had to speak. So, is there a guilty party?" Poirot turned. "Yeah, but not murder. At least, not in the classic sense." That afternoon, Poirot visited Amanda Lytton. He found her in her backyard, half-heartedly pruning roses. She was wearing a grey dress and dark glasses, despite the cloudy sky. "Are you here to ask me for a confession?" he asked without turning. "No, mademoiselle, I come to offer you a truth. And let's see if you're ready to admit that you know her." Amanda put the scissors on a chair. "What truth?" "That Edmund showed him the portrait." Not whole, maybe, not for a long time, but enough for you to understand what it meant and to make sure it never came to light. Amanda hesitated. Then he took off his glasses. His eyes were red. It was not I who destroyed it, Monsieur Poirot. It wouldn't make sense. It wasn't me he was portraying. But did you see it? Silence. Yeah. Poirot came a little closer. And what did you see? Amanda sat up slowly, as if she was having trouble supporting the weight of the memory. A woman. Not with a name or exact face, but with an essence. It represented what he said the world refused to see. Beauty as a mask, power disguised as generosity, art as a moral transaction. It wasn't Lady Weatherby exactly. It was what she represented, and also what he feared I would become. You, Edmund, adored me. But he was also afraid of me. He said I was dangerously adaptable, that I could become anything to survive in that world. His painting was a warning, a symbolic portrait, not a literal one. But everyone would have understood it as a direct attack. Poirot looked at his trembling hands. And what did you do after seeing it? I asked him to hide it, that he wouldn't show it. Let me think about it better. He heard me, but I think it was already decided. And that night, he died. Do you know if he committed suicide? Amanda shook her head. Don't know, but there was no anger in him, just a sadness. Heavy. Poirot bowed slightly. What if I told you that someone else saw that portrait after you? That it didn't disappear like everyone thinks? Amanda looked up, alarmed. What does it mean? That the portrait was transferred, maybe before Ashcroft died, maybe for himself, but it exists and someone still keeps it, as a weapon, as a threat, or as I remember. Amanda stood up abruptly. Are you saying that all of this isn't over? I'm saying that as long as that portrait exists, what it represents is still alive. That night Poirot turned on a small lamp on his desk and took from the bottom drawer a sealed envelope which he had collected silently during his last visit to Ashcroft's study. I hadn't mentioned it yet, not to the police, not to anyone. Inside there was a photograph. Poor quality, black and white, but enough to reveal the essence of the original painting. The female figure in an armchair, surrounded by books and empty glasses, a barely curved smile, and the eyes, hollow, without pupils, as if they were not looking, but judging. Poirot held her for a long time. Then he slipped it back into the envelope and wrote on top, "Memory, not evidence," because sometimes what destroys is not what is seen, but what is never forgotten. Chapter 9. The Canvas That Only Burns Inside. London, with its endless parade of carriages, tilted hats and damp streets, continued on its course without realizing that a different storm was brewing over a few, or sure, art and society circles. The name of Edmund Ashcroft was beginning to fade, replaced by new exhibitions, new controversies. But in the narrowest world of those involved, the invisible portrait continued to throb like a wound that did not stop festering. Hercule Poirot was walking along a cobbled path in the Holland Park Gardens, where he had discreetly met Monsieur Duvivier, the Parisian dealer who had hinted so much without saying anything concrete. Duvivier arrived with dark gloves and a walking stick that was more decorative than useful. I was surprised by your invitation, Monsieur Poirot. Haven't you already solved the puzzle? There's a piece missing, Poirot replied bluntly. And that piece, I'm afraid, you've had closer than you admit. Duvivier laughed, but cautiously. Are you implying that I'm hiding something? No, monsieur. I affirm that it does. Duvivier stopped smiling. I warn you that I am not part of Lady Weatherby's inner circle. I'm just a businessman. A businessman who knew of the portrait's existence long before anyone mentioned it, who used the word compromising with a revealing familiarity. And that, according to Iris Lemaire, she bought several minor works by Ashcroft the previous month, all from the same lot where the painting supposedly would have been. Duvivier remained silent. Poirot stopped by an empty fountain. His cap tilted slightly on his forehead. You need not deny it, monsieur. I'm not looking to steal the value of your collection, just understanding what he saw and what he decided to do about it. Finally, Duvivier spoke, his voice lower. Edmond showed me the portrait. Not everything, just a fragment. I had it covered. But even that fragment, it was enough. It was a work different from anything he had painted before, more cruel, more personal. He told me it wasn't for sale, that it wasn't even made to be seen. He said it like that, as if it were a punishment, for himself or for others. And what did you do? I offered him money, not because of the painting, for rights, for the symbolic. He knew that in the right circles a hidden cursed work could be worth a fortune. But he refused. He kicked me out of the studio. He seemed terrified by what he had created. Poirot nodded slowly. And then, 2 weeks later, he died. And 3 days later, someone sent me an anonymous package. Inside, a blurry photograph of the painting, just like the one you should already have. Poirot watched him carefully, but showed no surprise. Did you keep it? Yeah, as proof of its existence. But I haven't shown it to anyone. I won't even sell it, I swear. Poirot looked up at the bare trees. You're not the only one who has a copy. And not everyone shares his caution. That night in his apartment, Poirot unfolded the photograph once more. He watched it silently, as if waiting for the image to finally speak. The face in the portrait, that face without eyes but with a barely visible smile, had something universal. It did not represent a woman, but a condition, to a structure. It was the symbol of gentle power, of sweet manipulation, of the truth that is offered as a gift. But that is poison in disguise. This is it, he murmured. That's why they feared this portrait, because he didn't accuse, he didn't point, he showed calmly. And that is much more devastating. He took his notebook and wrote precisely. Suspects Lady Weatherby, protection of reputation and legacy. Julian, fear of losing his position. Amanda, fear of seeing herself reflected in the portrait. Elridge, defender of legal silence. Duvivier, interested in symbolic value. Iris, awareness of emotional destruction. The Colonel, still silent, but witness Bont Poirot underlined the last name. Colonel Bainbridge, quiet at dinners, unmoved by the revelations, and, according to George's discreet records, present at Ashcroft's studio just 2 days before the artist's death. Next morning, Poirot showed up unannounced at the Colonel's home. He was greeted by a tall, dry man with a direct gaze. No frills. He finally came to see me. "I thought I'd already ruled it out," Bainbridge said. "No one is ruled out until the curtain closes," replied Poirot calmly. "You had known Edmund for years. I saw him become what he was, and I saw him break inside. The painting was his way of getting revenge on all of us. And he did it." Poirot approached. "Did you see it?" "I saw what he let me see. An outstretched hand, a fallen cup, a half-made face. But I knew it was about us. We all knew it." "And what did you do with that knowledge?" The Colonel pursed his lips. "Nothing, because the truth, Monsieur Poirot, should not always be told. Sometimes the bravest thing is to remain silent." Poirot did not answer. I already had everything clear. The portrait had not been destroyed, not burned. It had been shared in pieces, through memories, through fear. Each one carried it with them. It was a picture, painted in consciousness, and that painting, no one could ever erase it. Chapter 10. The Last Trace of the Invisible Brush. The morning was clear, too clear, as if the weather itself was unaware that a man had died, and that the truth was still suspended in the air, not daring to touch the ground. In his meticulously tidy apartment, Poirot ate his breakfast while he wrote down his notes. Everything seemed to be in its place. The faces, the motives, the omissions, but it was still missing a detail, a small crack that would explain what no one had wanted to say. And as always, as he liked to repeat, it is in the small where the truth lives. It was George who interrupted him. "Sir, a package has just arrived by courier. There is no sender." Poirot raised an eyebrow. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside, a precisely folded sheet of paper. A few words in black ink, careful handwriting. It wasn't a portrait, it was a mirror. Next to the note, a rusty key. Poirot remained motionless for several seconds. Then he got up and went straight to his coat. The address written on the back of the paper led him to a disused warehouse near the river, in a part of Chelsea that few remembered. When he arrived, he used the key. The door opened with a metallic groan, revealing a dark space smelling of dust and ancient oil. At the bottom, covered by a grey tarp, he found a single object. An easel. There was no painting, only the easel, with marks of weight, dried paint and pressure. The frame was there, but without canvas, just the void, where once was the object most feared by that select circle of London. Poirot approached. Under the base of the easel, he found a word carved into the wood. Reflection. Does not sign, no date, just that word. The detective remained motionless for several minutes. Then he turned around and walked out. I didn't need to see the portrait. Nobody needed to see it. His existence had already transformed everything. That night, Poirot organized a small meeting. He invited each of those involved: Lady Weatherby, Julian, Amanda, Iris, Elridge, Duvivier, and Colonel Bainbridge. The hall at Whitehaven Mansions was prepared as if it were a formal dinner, but without food. Just seats, silence, and the shared tension of those who knew that something was not over. When everyone was present, Poirot spoke in a slow voice, without theatricality, like someone who is tired of lies and wants, finally, to close a wound. "Ladies, gentlemen, thanks for coming. I have not called you here to accuse, but to acknowledge. All of you, to a greater or lesser extent, saw a part of that picture, and everyone, in one way or another, tried to make it disappear." Nobody responded. Poirot continued. "Ashcroft did not paint a portrait to offend or for display, painted a reflection. You saw in him what you feared about yourself, not what he believed about you, but what you knew could be true." Amanda looked away. Duvivier shifted in his chair. Julian lowered his head. "He was not murdered," said Poirot firmly. "But his death was provoked, not with poison or pushing, but with abandon, with indifference, with the final rejection that receives those who, instead of flattering, dare to show." Lady Weatherby, for the first time, spoke. "And what do you propose we do with this, Monsieur Poirot?" "Nothing," he answered calmly. "There is no judgment they can fear more than the one they already carry inside. The portrait already lives in all of you, and no one can hang it in a gallery. But each one will decide whether to look at it or avoid it." There was a long silence, dense, as if everyone recognized that, finally, someone had said what no one dared to name. "I, for my part," added Poirot, rising to his feet, "will keep the note, and the key, not as evidence, but as a warning." One by one, the guests left, without arguing, without answering, as if they understood that the true trial did not need a judge, nor a courtroom, nor a sentence. It had already started in each one of them. Hours later, Poirot wrote the last entry in his notebook. Case closed. Not by resolution, but by acceptance. The crime was not killing a man, but denying him the possibility of being heard without fear. And when he turned off the light, he murmured with elegant sadness, "Sometimes art does not die when it is destroyed. He dies when everyone decides to look the other way." Chapter 11. The Voice of the Man Who Did Not Paint. Days after the meeting, London social life continued its course, although in certain circles the greetings were more tense, the glances shorter. The galleries reopened, the society columns changed their scandal, and the memory of Edmund Ashcroft began, like so many others, to be softened by the patina of omission. But Hercule Poirot was not finished yet. The case, as he had said, was closed, but his mind did not know rest when there was still a voice left unheard. Not that of a witness, nor that of the guilty, but that of the victim. And in this case, that voice was recorded not on a canvas, but in a notebook of personal notes, bouillis, that Georges had found by chance among the belongings returned from the studio, inside a box labelled "Discard Material." Poirot leafed through it delicately. Pages of unfinished sketches, crossed-out phrases, quotes from forgotten painters, and then, among all that, an entry dated 10 days before Ashcroft's death. "They told me that I should not paint what I think, that I should paint what they expect of me. That beauty should not bother. But what good is a portrait if it only decorates?" Poirot turned the page. "Amanda thinks I'm exaggerating. Julian thinks I'm inventing. Lady Weatherby doesn't say anything, but she watches me like someone measuring the weight of a closed box. Everyone thinks that what I'm going to show will destroy them. They don't understand that I'm there too. Me trapped between what I see and what they will never dare to see. Another page. I'll finish it. Not because I want revenge, but because, for once, I want to stop lying with the brushes. Poirot closed the notebook. He remained for a few minutes with his eyes closed. There was no murderer to punish, but there was a truth to honour. That same day, Poirot went to the Art Institute of London. There, in a secondary gallery, a retrospective exhibition of minor artists of the century was being prepared. The organiser, a young man with glasses and restless hands, recognised Poirot. Instantly, Monsieur Poirot. What an honour! Are you interested in our sample? Rather, I am interested in what is not going to be shown. The man looked at him with bewilderment. Sorry? The works of Edmund Ashcroft. I know that some pieces of yours were considered for this exhibition, but they were later withdrawn. Ah, yes, that's right. Lady Weatherby requested that her privacy be respected. I guess after the tragedy. Could you show them to me in private? The young man barely hesitated, but Poirot's eyes were impossible to resist. Minutes later, they were in the gallery's warehouse. Behind the scenes and packaging, 4 of Ashcroft's works waited in silence. 3 of them were known, formal portraits well executed, without soul. The 4th was covered. That one doesn't have a title, said the curator. They sent it without a technical sheet. Nobody has wanted to open it. Poirot approached. Slowly he lifted the cloth, and there it was, the portrait, not in photography, not in fragment, the original, intact. The barely sketched female figure had no name or recognizable face, but an unmistakable energy. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a joke. It was a shared confession. And in the figure's vacant gaze, one could see, if one dared, one's own projected image. Poirot did not speak. He didn't even breathe for several seconds. Then he lowered the cloth respectfully. This painting should not be exhibited, he said with a definitive tone. Not because it has no value, but because its value is private. Like a letter that was read by everyone, but signed by no one. The curator nodded without fully understanding. Poirot handed him his card. In case anyone claims this work, send it to me. Until then, consider her in custody. Back at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot wrote a letter. Not for Scotland Yard, not even for the gallery, not even for any of the suspects. Wrote it for Ashcroft. I couldn't prevent them from destroying it while I was alive, but I have prevented them from turning you into a tool. Your work will not be exploited, nor will your pain be sold. Rest, then, with the certainty that the portrait fulfilled its purpose. It forced us to look, even if it was only for a moment. Signed his name. He kept the letter next to the artist's notebook. Then he looked out the window. The afternoon fell over London like a slow curtain. And for the first time since the case began, Poirot felt that the silence made sense. Because some truths should not be shouted, just preserve yourself. Chapter 12. The Truth That Needs No Light. A week had passed since Poirot had last seen the portrait. He hadn't mentioned it again. He had not returned to the Art Institute's warehouse, nor had he summoned more suspects, nor had he offered any public explanation. To those who knew him well, like Georges, who served the tea with a carefully neutral expression, that could only mean one thing. The case was solved. But in his own way, that afternoon, however, Poirot wrote several letters, not to accuse, not to declare justice, but to close open circles. The first was for Lady Weatherby. "Madam, you didn't destroy the portrait, but it helped bury it under layers of silence. He did it, perhaps, to protect those he loves, or to protect herself. But remember, protection that prevents growth becomes suffocation. You raised artists, yes, but he also caged them. Ashcroft was his mirror. You didn't break it, but you closed your eyes. For some, that is enough. The second, for Amanda Lytton. Mademoiselle, you saw the portrait. He understood what it showed, and yet he asked that it be hidden, not because of cowardice, for fear of seeing herself portrayed not as she was, but as she could become. That's a different kind of fear. But he faced it, and that is more than what others did. And the third, for Colonel Bainbridge. Mon Colonel, you understood from the beginning. The portrait was not an act of war, but an unarmoured truth. You remained silent, not out of loyalty, but out of respect. I do not approve of your silence, but I understand. Know, however, that your silence does not exempt you from the weight of knowledge. Art doesn't kill, but it forces you to choose, look or leave. As night fell, Poirot sat down at his desk. The fire crackled softly, and the rain began to caress the windows like a distant melody. He pulled out Ashcroft's notebook one last time. He reread the already familiar lines, but this time, at the end of the notebook, he noticed a page that he hadn't fully opened before. It was glued to the back cover, perhaps by accident, perhaps on purpose. And there, with a more shaky handwriting, as if it had been written on the very night of his death, he read, "If you're reading this, it means I showed it. Someone saw it. Not everyone, but enough. They didn't kill me. I let myself fall, not out of desperation, but out of decision. My last work didn't need a frame. It already lived in their minds." Poirot closed the notebook, and he smiled. In the following weeks, the news leaked. The Art Institute, following an anonymous request, had placed in its private collection an untitled, unexhibited work, classified as symbolic influence not attributable to a specific style. The portrait, apparently, would be preserved without exhibition, by joint decision of its owners. It would not be auctioned. It would not be published. It would not appear in catalogues. It would stay where Ashcroft had wanted it, in the shade, and yet it had not ceased to exist. A month later, Poirot received an unexpected visitor, Iris Lemaire. He was dressed in black, without adornments, with his eyes more serene than the last time. "Can I sit down?" he asked, entering the living room. "Of course, mademoiselle," replied Poirot. "Have you come to confess something?" She shook her head softly. "I came to thank you." Poirot bowed his head. "Because?" "For not exhibiting the pain, for not making the portrait a museum piece, for understanding that not everything must be resolved with noise." Poirot smiled slightly. "The truth, mademoiselle, it doesn't always need to be shouted to be heard. Sometimes it is enough to no longer deny it." She remained silent for a few seconds. Then she took out a small notebook from her bag. This was yours too. I found it among my things. Edmund used to take her when we went for walks. They are phrases, thoughts. Most of them don't make sense. But in the end, you wrote something that reminded me of you. Poirot opened it. The calligraphy was freer, more disordered, and indeed, at the end, a sentence. In the end, I was not a painter. I was a reflection. And that was enough. Poirot closed his notebook. Oui, more than enough. When Iris left, Poirot returned to his desk. He turned on the hay lamp. He took a clean sheet, and he wrote, Case, the picture that was never painted. Conclusion. Painted, yes, but not to be seen. Victim. Edmund Ashcroft, painter, man of vision. Guilty, none. All time will tell. Reason, fear of reflection. The truth without a veil. He saved the sheet in a new file. Then he placed the notebook in the same box that contained the notebook, the photograph, the rusty key, and the unsent letter. He turned off the lamp, and with a precise gesture, he placed the box on top of his shelf, where the real things must be, not in sight, but never forgotten.